morning, everybody.
Hello.
Tash and Bex here from Consciousness Rising and what's our other channel? Oh, Deb and Mackenzie Friends and Truth Pills if you're watching us on Truth Pills. Good morning to you all.
Hello.
Now today, Tash has prepared something really juicy for us, haven't you, Tash?
Well, a bit juicy.
I think it's juicy.
It's just an alternative perception on Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, now Jack the Ripper, when you said you were doing Jack the Ripper, I was like, ooh. Now, I know there's been controversy over Jack the Ripper, hasn't there? And the last thing I saw on TV was about 10 years ago. It was a documentary.
I put a documentary out, yeah.
And I remember watching it and it was implying that it was Prince Albert?
Not specifically.
One of Vicky's kids, wasn't it?
Not specifically.
Okay, right. So all right, but they also in that program.
But they probably put that.
It revealed that there was a certain way that they were being mutilated. The women were being mutilated, and I thought then it felt ritual. But that was never highlighted in the program.
That was just your perception.
It was just my perception. I thought it seemed ritual. Anyway, I'll let you start, darling.
It's quite reedy, this one, because it's quite a lot of factual information, so it's a bit like overload.
Okay.
So we'll start with what have Jack the Ripper, Prince Eddy, Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill, and the Queen Mother got in common?
They're all horrible people.
Yeah, apart from the obvious.
Yeah, they're all satanic.
So in the heyday of Queen Victoria's reign, during the late summer of 1881, a young woman's body was discovered mutilated in a slum in Whitechapel. So it was the body of Mary Ann Nichols, and she was a prostitute, and she was found brutally hacked to death. She had her throat slit that way, and she had horrific cuts to her torso, which exposed all of her
inner
internal organs.
Yeah.
So we go back a little bit now in time and sort of work out the lead up.
Yeah.
So there was a man called Walter Sickert, and he was an artist.
Sickert.
Do you know that's German? Sickert.
Yeah, it sounds German.
Or Sickert. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. He was a well-known artist of that era.
Okay.
And he was employed by the royal family in the 1880s to provide art lessons to who was then the heir to the throne, Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence, otherwise known as Prince Eddy.
Right.
We don't know much about Prince Eddy.
We don't know much
So
about
he
Prince
was
Eddy.
the eldest son of King Edward VII and Princess Alexandra. So therefore he was the grandson of the reigning monarch, which was Queen Victoria.
Right.
And he was the older brother of the future King of England.
Okay.
So Eddy would have been first in line to the throne. However, he was born partially deaf and well below average intelligence due to centuries of interbreeding.
And don't they just lock those people away that in the royalty that are
so basically, he was shunned and ostracised by the majority of his family, basically mainly because of his low intelligence, I think. And it's also worth noting at this time that Queen Victoria was a patron and great supporter of Freemasonry, and it was the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family that sponsored the rise of Adam Welswalt, who was the founder of the Illuminati. And there are said to be several Masonic lodges in the royal palaces, a significant one being the Royal Alpha Lodge in Kensington Palace.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So in 1885, Prince Eddy was initiated into this lodge by his father. And Eddy was a regular customer at a homosexual sort of paedophilic brothel in Clearland Street in London. And basically, Eddy, with his low intelligence, he indiscreetly instigated a series of love letters with a young boy employed at these premises. And it's also said that Aleister Crowley had the letters in his possession for many years, but they've since been lost or destroyed. So Eddy was a bit of a liability.
It was,
and
it perhaps inappropriate, and also because he had low intelligence, he wasn't able to cover his tracks.
Yes, he was a liability to them, so I think they had to sort of quite often hide stuff that he'd done. So it was, that's maybe why Aleister Crowley had the letters. But he was said to have got a young Catholic commoner of Irish descent pregnant by the name of Annie Crook, and they'd also married her. They'd done one Anglican through the Anglican Church and one Catholic ceremony, and they'd done them sort of undercover. And this stopped him from being able to become king, obviously, because the royals weren't allowed to marry commoners and they weren't allowed to marry into the Catholic Church. at that time.
Do you think the family allowed that to happen to make sure he didn't get on the throne?
Possibly, because obviously...
Because that would have been really
because
awkward.
obviously, with his intelligence. So this lady, Annie, she worked as a tobacconist, and she needed cover for when she had the baby. And she met a lady named Mary Jean Kelly, who took the position and worked alongside Annie for a while, and they actually became really good friends. And when Annie gave birth to the daughter Alice, Mary had moved in and sort of helped with, they call it wet nursing or whatever, and she sort of helped her, but she also continued to work as a prostitute because she was a prostitute.
What Mary was? Annie?
No. Mary
Mary
was, yeah. So foreseeing the possibility of things getting bad and the fact that the establishment were obviously very unimpressed with this relationship and the baby, Annie gave her child to Walter Sickret for safekeeping, and that was the artist guy that we spoke about. So there was a connection to Eddy, so there was obviously a little bit of trust with this guy. So this baby was given for safekeeping.
Quite weird to give it to a man.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? It was given to a man. So, and she was subsequently kidnapped from an apartment where her and Eddy used to spend time together.
The baby?
Nope.
The woman?
Yeah, Annie, who was supposedly married to Eddy. Yeah, so she got kidnapped, and also at the same time, Eddy got abducted into a carriage, and he was headed for Buckingham Palace, where he was instructed to stay until further notice. Sadly, Annie was taken to Guy's Hospital, and she stayed there for 5 months, and Sir William Gull, who was the Queen's surgeon or doctor at the time, he performed a partial frontal lobotomy on her, rendering her docile and compliant, and she was certified insane by this same doctor, and spent her life in the institution, dying at St George's Union Workhouse in obscurity in 1920, aged 57.
How sad. I mean, a lot of women were banged up at that time under the mental health.
Yes.
Hysteria.
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 Right, hysterical.
She's hysterical.
Yeah, hysteria. Well, weren't they? And they were put into these asylums. Yeah, it's terrible. So basically, obviously, Mary, who was her friend, knew about Eddy and knew all about everything that had gone on. And she carried on living in the sort of prostitution world. And she basically started bragging a little bit about the royal connections. And she hatched a plan with 4 other women who were believed to be prostitutes as well, to bribe and extort money from Walter Sickret, threatening to go public with the story if he didn't comply. Yep. So Sickret passed this information on to Eddy, because they obviously did have a kind of friendship, yeah. But Eddy, being a little bit short of whatever, he informed his father. He was a bit tick. Silly, really, because he did love Annie. You know, he did want to be with Annie, but he informed his father, and then it was discussed at the Royal Alpha Lodge, and a meeting was arranged by the Royal Masons, known as the Princes of Royal Blood, whereby a form of a hunting party was hatched to literally hunt down and kill the girls as punishment. These girls have been sort of wanting to do this blackmail, but more significantly, it would be a Masonic blood sacrifice ritual. Yeah. So this hunting party included Sir William Gull, who we've already said was the Queen's doctor, a man called Sir Charles Warren, who was the commissioner of the Met Police. Now, it's interesting at this point to point out that the police didn't take any active role in any of the killing, but they facilitated the plot and the cover-up. So, interesting to know they didn't take part in it, but they
knew about it and they ignored it.
And then they also hired a coachman who was called John Nettie. And he wasn't a very nice man at all, apparently. Very, very unkind man. And he was kind of like the getaway driver, I suppose. It's the best way to put it out. Yeah, with his horse and carriage, yeah, exactly.
Racing through the streets.
So Charles Warren, who was the commissioner of the Met Police, he obviously, in that area of Whitechapel, knew the whereabouts of the said prostitutes, because it was quite easy in those days to find out who was who and what they're all up to. It's quite like a small area, really. So it was easy for him to find out where they were, and he provided all the information on the girls, who they slept with, where they hung out, all that sort of thing. And then Sir William Gull, he prepared grapes and injected them with opium. So this would subdue the victims, so that everything could take place, with minimum effort, and fuss, if you like. And then there was a guy called James Stephen, who just happened to be a cousin of Virginia Woolf and a Freemason. He was what you call like the lookout. He would be on the lookout while the murders
were going on.
Yeah. And then the ringleader, this is interesting. So the ringleader of this murderous gang was none other than the very prominent Mason, Secretary of State for India, leader of the House of Commons and Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Randolph Spencer Churchill. Spencer being the same family that Lady Diana comes from, by the way.
And what about the Churchill bit?
Father of the future Prime Minister, William Winston Churchill. So he was the brains of the operation, but personally responsible for the cutting of the Masonic symbols into the bodies, whilst the skilled surgeon, Gull, performed the organ removal. Pretty grim, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the ritualistic murder spree began on the 31st of August in 1888 with Mary Ann Nichols and continued with a lady called Annie Chapman on the 5th of September. Both of these women were lured into the carriage, then killed and mutilated and executed again, so the throats were cut across, their bodies were torn open, organs removed and arranged around their bodies in their final resting places, and then their entrails are thrown over the left shoulder, which is the sign of them.
I thought was ritualistic, was this
very placing
and this thing
over the shoulder. And then on the 30th of September there were two further killings, a lady called Lizzie Stride and a lady called Catherine Eddowes. Now, Catherine was killed in error because it was believed that she was the blackmailer-in-chief, Mary Kelly, who was friends with Annie at the beginning, but that was actually mistaken identity.
So they just picked the wrong girl.
So they got the wrong girl, yeah. And this Catherine was one that they were after, and she was severely mutilated, and she was left opposite the Masonic temple, which was close to the Whitechapel Road. But Lizzie's murder was interrupted, and they had to abandon her body before the full ritual was complete.
Okay, so they didn't finish.
Yeah, so they didn't finish that one. So after these mistakes, there was actually a pause for a month or so while they tried to find the real Mary, who had been in hiding, because obviously it had become very aware that what was going on.
She would have known.
Yeah, it's quite frightening, isn't it? And she was tracked down on the 9th of November. And they decided to ditch the coach method because obviously it had been foiled.
It was a pattern.
And it was a pattern. And what they did is they ritualistically killed her in her actual lodgings.
In her room, yeah.
So what is quite clear from this is that none of the murders were carried out in the streets where the bodies were found. Absolutely impossible, because basically they were perpetrated in the moving coach, bar Mary Kelly, who was killed in situ. So the police must have known that the bodies had been moved to their resting places due to the lack of blood. I mean, it would have been, and people would have heard it and seen it, and it would have just been obvious, wouldn't it, out on the streets in the middle of, in that era with prostitution rife and just, you know, in these slum areas. There's just no way that that they would have taken place without anyone seeing it. And, you know, it would have just, there would have been blood
everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And they weren't, they were
clean.
They were clean. It was basically a ritual. So it's quite clear that, you know, that they weren't performed in the street like they sort of wanted people to believe.
Yeah.
So Prince Eddy, bless him, he died in 1933, 41 years after his official death. So they made out that he had died.
Where was he all that time?
They during this time, apparently his mother only visited him once, and he spent these years inside the walls of, is it Glenys Castle? Glenys Castle?
Not Glenys. I don't know. Glenys. I've not heard of that one. In Scotland, though.
Yes, Scotland. I think it's with Balmoral, part of Balmoral, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know they spend quite a bit of time up there, don't they?
Yeah. So basically he was incarcerated in there, and when he found out basically that his wife had been lobotomised, he had a massive nervous breakdown.
Aww.
And he withdrew himself further and further, and he was never the same again anyway. But it was also reported that that Randolph Churchill and John Netley, so the Churchill one was the mastermind, and the Netley guy was the horrible guy who was the getaway man, the coach man. They planned to murder Eddy, and he was pushed off the cliff top at Balmoral. But he survived his fall, and apparently it took him 2 days to crawl back to the castle. And it was decided at this point that the best option would be just to keep him incarcerated. So it gets a bit interesting here, because to keep him incarcerated, they had to find somebody who was willing to do that, especially for that was quite a lot of years, 41 years after he was officially known to be dead. So the Earl of Strathmore agreed to undertake this task in return of a stipulation that one of his daughters would be allowed to marry the future King of England. So this daughter was none other than the Queen Mother.
Oh.
So she was
So
Lady
that was
Elizabeth.
Her father then.
Yeah,
was...
so Lady Elizabeth Bowes Lyon was her name. So she was initially bestowed to his older brother, which would have been Edward VIII, wouldn't it? So Edward VIII, but obviously he abdicated.
Fell in love with Simpson.
Yeah, so he abdicated. So she went on to marry George VI of England.
Yeah.
So that was how the Queen Mother. So it's interesting how, she even became part of the royal family. It's very bizarre. So
it's actually part of a deal.
Yeah, part of a deal. They're all so gross, aren't they?
Yeah.
So Alice, who was Annie and Eddie's baby, took up residence in Dieppe in France with Sicret. And interestingly, when Alice grew up, her and Walter Sicret became lovers, which is gross again. Weird. They became lovers and they had a child named Joseph Sicret. And this man is the very man who held Inspector Aberline's diaries after inheriting from the father, and that's where a lot of this information has come from. So he was an inspector on the police force of the Met at the time who happened to write diaries.
So he documented it all.
So he documented it, but the information came from I think it was called Frederick George Aberline, and he oversaw the investigation at the time. And it's important to note that these diaries didn't see the light of day until about 70 years later, after the unsolved murders. So it was hidden. They were hidden all that time. And they basically went from Aberline to Walter, who married Annie, and then down to their son, who was called Joseph. So that's where the diaries were kept. And that's where a lot of this information that I'm talking about has come from. So apparently the sealed files are still in Scotland Yard now. They're still sealed. They're still not allowed to be opened.
Wow, all this time later.
Yeah. Shocking, isn't it?
Oh, well, it's because it's royalty. Anything to do with royalty, any misdemeanours on their front always get covered up. I mean, look at what's going on at the moment.
With What's His Chops,
What's His Chops, yeah.
What's His Chops. So, so that was where the information was in there. So, interestingly, J.K. Stephen, who was the tutor of Eddy back in the day, he actually went to the police and he confessed to all because he just couldn't live with his guilt anymore, and he surrendered himself. No arrests were made, and he was also released without charge.
So they just said, don't worry about it, mate.
Yep. But apparently he suffered a complete breakdown and died in a lunatic asylum in Northampton, aged 33. Aww. So it's another sort of...
I don't know why I'm saying,
poor man.
No, not poor man.
And
he deserved that.
And then Sir William Gull, he died shortly after the murders. So that was the surgeon or the doctor of the Queen.
How did he die?
So early 1890 he died. And again, he was committed to an asylum. So another one, young, shortly after it, committed to an asylum dead. And then even Randolph Churchill, he died in 1895, rumoured to be insane, but brought on by syphilis. And then John Nettie, who was the Getaway man, was believed to have been drowned in the Thames by somebody.
Do you think these people were insane, or do you think...
No, it's probably a
way
you've got to get rid of them.
them.
It's the evidence, isn't it? Because at some point they could talk. Well, one of them did, didn't they?
Well, and it also, if they're struggling with what they've done, guilt makes you want to
say something. And you could still talk to somebody. You could tell your wife or your child, and then they could tell somebody. They could tell somebody. So it's silencing,
had to be,
isn't it?
Contained.
And if anything done in an asylum is out of prying eyes.
Yeah.
So it's quite a good ploy, isn't it, to use it?
Or you can just say, "Oh, don't listen to them; they're insane."
Yeah, exactly.
It's
a really good, it's a really good way.
Good cover up.
And then you said earlier about the BBC production, and they did touch slightly on this theory. And there was a guy called Stephen Knight who was an author. He's a late author, and he actually interviewed Joseph Sicret, which was Annie and
Annie's husband.
No, son.
Oh, sorry. Oh yes, of course, Annie's son.
So basically, who was with... So, no, it'd be not son, it'd be grandson, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Grandson, because that's the only one to be alive.
Because Annie had Alice.
Yes, and then Alice and...
Then Alice had Joseph.
And then they had Joseph, yeah. So, he interviewed this guy, and this Stephen Knight totally believed that he was telling the truth. And he said he recited all of this history from his father. So he got all the information was passed down by this father via these diaries. And, you know, this Stephen Knight was like, oh my God, yeah, this is what he's saying is the truth. But unfortunately, Knight wanted to write a book, and he went on to write a book. And Joseph got really upset by this because he'd only agreed to do a short interview, and he felt it was an invasion into the privacy of his family and
Probably
his father.
didn't want any more hoo-ha about it.
And Knight continued to publish this book. But unfortunately, he kind of took his own take in the book, this Knight, and he tried to implicate Walter, who was the father, as the murderer. So, of course, Joseph at this point got really, really angry because never at any point had he disclosed that his father was the murderer involved in that way. So, he got really, really angry, cut all ties, and then he publicly announced that he'd made the whole story up about his father's involvement in any of it purely for publicity. So then it put the story back under, so it put it back under the radar. But yeah.
So
what do you reckon on that one, then?
Basically, that was all about covering up.
It was basically Eddy, obviously, with his low intelligence, had a bit of a big mouth. He got involved with a girl he shouldn't have done, who then got involved with a girl who was a prostitute and was involved in all that. They just got loose lips, sink ships. Yeah. Started saying about the royal connection and Eddie's baby, and baby moved off to France, and exposure basically. And then they tried to bribe people, and then the briberies obviously went wrong, and the Masons' way of, and the established way of closing it down was to turn it into a hunt. Enjoy it.
They like
hunt them down and kill those poor girls. Yeah, it's punishment.
And interesting that it wasn't enough to kill them. It was like it had to be done in a ritualistic way.
Yeah, horrible. Yeah, really horrible, nasty stuff. So so that's an interesting sort of.
Well, it's the truth. It's revealing.
Well, it wouldn't be out there, would it? The information, if that's
no,
you know.
And there's been enough rumours. There's no smoke without fire. And I think... And
it's an unsolved case, isn't it? Jack the Ripper's still an unsolved case. They never sort of like, you know... And why are all the people connected to it? Why did they all die young and...
Yeah, or end up in a loony asylum.
Yeah, and they died. They still died in the asylum, so...
Well, and that's what they do even now with people who they want to shut up.
Yeah, say they're mad.
Yeah, section them.
Section them, yeah. Say that they're, It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. And where do you think they killed the girls then?
So in the moving carriages.
In the carriages.
Yeah, so they would have been moving. They wouldn't have been...
Still.
They wouldn't have been still, apart from the latter one who was killed in her own apartment.
Yeah, that last one.
Mary, was it Mary?
Yeah.
The other three were done in the carriage.
I guess with the noise of the wheels clattering.
Slowly moving, and they had another man who was the getter, who was ready to go off fast and canter off whenever they needed to.
And I guess they'd clean up the carriage.
Exactly, much easier than trying to clean up a property or the road. No, you just couldn't get the bodies like that, and that's obviously how it's obvious there was a surgeon involved as well, the precision. Yeah. And the fact that it was tidied up and clean, and that would have been done by someone with experience in that type of thing.
Ew.
There we
go. Disgust. Well, just the whole thing is just horrible, isn't it? And I mean, we still live in a time where, if they want to shut you up,
they'll give it a good go.
They'll give it a good go.
Absolutely. Nothing's changed, really.
No. And we're still...
So we better shut up.
Yeah, they'll be after us next. If I hear a carriage coming...
Yeah, if you hear the clippity-clops.
Yeah, I'll just hide.
Yeah.
Hide under the bed or something.
Just hide. They won't find you.
No, they won't find me.
They won't find you.
Anyway, thank you, Tasha.
Pleasure.
For that gruesome tale.
Yeah, it was a bit gruesome, sorry.
No, it's all right, because this is the reality of the situation that we're realising.
And we need to hear these alternative theories as well, there's lots for all of history. It's all been middled around with, isn't it? Meddled with, so we know it does need to come out.
And it's being aware that the satanic side of things, the very, very dark side of things, and particularly in relation to the Masons, has been going on hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's only now we've got the technology to all kind of swap notes and compare that we can call it out properly. Isn't it?
It is.
Anyway, we've got some quite different stuff to do in the future, haven't we, Tash?
Yes.
we're going to do some exposés.
Yes, and some testimonies and people talking out about experiences within the system, shall we say.
Yes. So we'll be back. Are we back next week with something
Maybe
exciting?
the week after. Depends on what we decide to do, whether we're going to start, because it's going to be a bit time consuming, the next bits that we've got to do, because we need to collate information from people. It's not in our control.
No, we're getting testimonies from other people.
So
Although we could do a little one on.
We could do a little pre-show.
Yeah, we could do a pre-show.
A little pre-show, like roughly what it's about, and then we can
and then get stuck in.
And then we'll do that.
But so in the meantime, guys, have a good week.
Have a good one.
Listen out for carriage wheels. Hide.
Quickly.
And remember that loose lips cost lives.
Yes, they do. Yeah, don't brag about your royal connections.
No, if you've got a royal connection, I'd say, zip it.
Keep it quiet.
Keep it quiet. Who wants to be connected to royalty anyway these days?
It's gross, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're all just...
I know.
It's horrible.
And they don't sweat.
No.
Apparently
They don't, do they?
No, never sweat. Anyway, I think that's it for today.
Absolutely.
So we will speak to you next week. Have
See
a
you next
lovely
time.
one.
Bye.
Bye, guys.